What if I told you that in the quiet kitchens of 1912, behind lace curtains and coal-fired stoves, middle-class families were cooking meals we've almost completely forgotten? Before fast food chains, before frozen dinners, there was a time when home cooks measured flour by feel, and recipes were passed down, not posted online. These weren't the fancy feasts of the upper class or the hard survival meals of the poor, no. These were the everyday triumphs of working families. Dishes made with care, with pride, baked in paper bags, molded in cast-iron cones, stuffed with figs, smoked over fire. Meals with names like Diables au cheval and gnocchi of milk, odd to our ears now, but once familiar sounds around supper tables. So why did we forget them? Was it convenience? Modern taste? Or did we simply lose touch with the rhythm of the past? In this video, we're going way back to rediscover 15 middle-class American recipes from 1912 that time quietly tucked away. And by the end, you might just wish we never stopped making them. In 1912, tucked inside many immigrant kitchens from New York to Chicago, there was a quiet, bubbling pot of something soft, strange, and beautiful: gnocchi of farina. Not the potato gnocchi we know today. This was humbler, simpler, made from semolina flour, butter, and milk stirred into a thick porridge and poured out onto a marble slab to cool. Middle-class Italian-American families, fresh from the old country, brought this recipe with them not as a luxury, but as a way to stretch food. They'd cut it into squares or circles, sprinkle it with grated cheese and dot it with butter, then bake it until golden at the edges. No tomato sauce. No fanfare. Just soft, rich, soul-warming bites meant to fill the stomach and remind one of home. Cookbooks of the time, like Simple Italian Cookery from 1912, called it gnocchi di semolina, but American housewives called it survival with elegance. It was meatless, yes, but never joyless. It wasn't long before this dish fell from favor. As Italian food in America became more restaurantized, dishes like this got left behind. They were too plain, too quiet, the kind of food you remembered your grandmother making, but never thought to pass on. Today, gnocchi of farina is almost extinct in American kitchens. But it deserves a comeback, not because it's trendy, but because it's true. It tells the story of a people, of resilience, of making something out of almost nothing. The golden crust, the soft center, the aroma of baked cheese, it's a dish that says, we may have had little, but we cooked with heart. So if you've never tasted it, maybe it's time you did. And if you have, well, you know exactly what we've been missing. Long before boxed puddings or instant mixes lined the shelves, dessert in a 1912 middle-class home meant something made by hand, and often by heart. One such dish, now nearly vanished, was gnocchi of milk. But don't be fooled by the name, this wasn't pasta. It was a delicate, molded custard, soft as a whisper, made from milk, sugar, egg yolks, and a touch of starch. Picture this: a mother in a long cotton apron, stirring gently over the stove as sunlight spills across her tiled floor. The mixture thickens just enough, no thermometer needed, then it's poured into a shallow dish, left to cool, and later cut into small diamond shapes. Each piece is placed in a buttered pan, baked until golden, and served warm with just a dusting of nutmeg, or perhaps a spoonful of jam if times were good. This was comfort food during the Edwardian era, mild, nourishing, and elegant in its restraint. Middle-class families, especially those of German or Dutch descent, passed it down like a secret, never fancy, but always loved. It was often made for children, for the sick, or simply for quiet evenings when something gentle was needed. But like so many soft-spoken recipes of that era, gnocchi of milk disappeared as desserts became richer, flashier, and faster. Who had time for delicate custards when cake mixes promised quicker joy? Still, there's a kind of magic in bringing it back. One bite and you're not just tasting dessert, you're tasting patience, simplicity, and a kitchen that never rushed anything. So if you ever wondered what dessert looked like before electric mixers and sugar overload, this is it: the soft, golden comfort of a forgotten world. And if this dish brings back a memory, a scent, or a smile, make sure to stick around. We've only just begun uncovering the recipes that time left behind. In the middle-class kitchens of 1912, especially among newly arrived Italian-American families, dessert wasn't a towering layer cake or a sugary pie. It was something far simpler and far more personal. Polenta cake, or migliaccio di farina gialla, was a rustic skillet sweet made from cornmeal, milk, eggs, and sugar stirred slowly until thick, folded with raisins, and baked to a golden crown. This wasn't just a cake. It was a memory from the old country, southern Italy, to be exact, where cornmeal was abundant and wheat flour was often too expensive. When these families settled in American towns and factory neighborhoods, they brought with them this humble tradition. In a new world full of unknowns, polenta cake reminded them of who they were and where they came from. The batter was thick, almost porridge-like, and flavored with lemon zest or anise if the cupboard allowed. Once baked, it firmed into a dense, custard-like slice that was more pudding than pastry. Served warm or cold, it was wrapped in cloth and packed for long days in the fields, or sliced thin with coffee at breakfast. But as America modernized, this golden cake faded. White flour became the norm. Supermarkets brought glossy desserts and box treats. And somewhere along the way, polenta cake, with its old-world texture and quiet charm, slipped from the family table. Today, you won't find it on bakery shelves or cafe menus. But for those who remember, it was the taste of Sunday afternoons, of frugality dressed in dignity, of a cake that didn't need frosting to be called special. And maybe, just maybe, that's the kind of sweetness we need again. Because some recipes weren't just meals. They were survival, celebration, and culture baked into one pan. Stay with us. The next forgotten dish may just surprise you even more. Before the hamburger became America's fast food icon, there was a dish that quietly nourished millions of middle-class families across the country: Hamburg steak. In 1912, this wasn't a sandwich. It was a thick, hand-formed patty of seasoned ground beef, sometimes blended with onion, suet, or stale bread crumbs, then roasted, often in a brown paper bag, to lock in its juices. This was the working family's steak. Affordable, filling, and endlessly adaptable. While upper-class homes dined on tenderloin and roast duck, the middle class learned how to stretch a single pound of meat to feed an entire table without ever sacrificing flavor or pride. Cookbooks of the time encouraged baking Hamburg steak en papillote in oiled or buttered paper, a method borrowed from French kitchens but modified for American stoves. The meat came out moist, flavorful, and wrapped in its own humble elegance. No grill, no flame, just heat, patience, and paper. Served with creamed onions, buttered peas, or mashed potatoes, it was the centerpiece of countless dinners. And for many children growing up in the 1910s, it was the first taste of steak they ever knew. But as meatpacking grew industrial and burgers became mass-produced, the original Hamburg steak quietly disappeared. It was too slow, too homemade, too honest. Fast food took its name, but none of its soul. Today, few even remember this dish existed. But those brown edges and soft centers once meant everything to families scraping by. It was nourishment, dignity, and tradition wrapped in paper and baked with love. And maybe, it's time we remember it. Because food like this isn't just about eating. It's about honoring where we came from. Stick around, the next forgotten dish takes us even deeper into 1912's incredible kitchen legacy. Before potato chips and party dips, before frozen appetizers ruled the table, there were anchovy canapes, tiny, savory bites that made middle-class hostesses feel just a little bit elegant in 1912. Imagine this: thin strips of buttered toast, crisp to perfection, and topped with a smear of anchovy paste, then popped into a warm oven, often wrapped in a paper bag, to bloom with flavor. Yes, paper bag. This odd little method was the secret weapon of Edwardian home cooks. By baking in parchment or a greased brown bag, the toast stayed delicate without burning, and the anchovy flavor mellowed into something unexpectedly rich. It was the kind of trick passed from neighbor to neighbor, scribbled into the margins of old cookbooks, and guarded like family treasure. Anchovy canapes were a parlor favorite, perfect for bridge nights, Sunday callers, or even quiet evenings with company. They weren't expensive, but they felt expensive. Just enough salt, just enough crunch, served with tea or a bit of sherry if you had it. For many middle-class homes, it was their way of saying, "We may not have much, but we entertain with style." But the anchovy fell from grace. Its bold, briny flavor faded from the American palate as processed foods took over. Canapes gave way to microwaved bites and supermarket platters. And those carefully cut toast fingers, buttered, bagged, and baked, were forgotten. Today, you'd be hard-pressed to find anyone who's even heard of anchovy canapes, let alone served them. But back then? They were a symbol of quiet sophistication, a salty, buttery memory of a slower, more intentional kind of gathering. Maybe it's time to bring them back, not for a crowd, but just for yourself. A taste of 1912. A moment of pause. A reminder that the smallest things once meant the most. And trust me, the next dish on this list is even stranger, and even more unforgettable. In the softly lit parlors of 1912 America, when families gathered for music, reading, or quiet conversation, one humble dish was passed around on fine china: hot cheese canapes. No, not modern nachos or melted dips. These were dainty rounds of Vienna bread, lightly buttered, dusted with sharp grated cheese, and kissed with a touch of cayenne. Simple? Yes. But they packed warmth, elegance, and just enough spice to make guests smile. Middle-class households prized these treats not just for flavor, but for presentation. A proper hostess could whip up a dozen in minutes, slipping them into a greased paper bag and sliding them into the oven. The bag helped keep the bread soft underneath while letting the cheese bubble and brown just right. A technique now lost to time, but back then, it was culinary cleverness passed on from mother to daughter without a second thought. Cheese was affordable and accessible. Bread came fresh from the local bakery. And the cayenne? That was the spark, a little luxury, a hint of modern flair that said, "We're keeping up with the times." They were served hot, always. If you let them cool, they lost their charm. Children loved them. So did book clubs, sewing circles, and quiet husbands relaxing after work. It was one of those dishes that required almost nothing, but offered so much in return: warmth, conversation, comfort. But in the age of electric toasters and frozen appetizers, hot cheese canapes vanished. Today, they live only in crumbling cookbooks and distant memories, a flavor, a method, a moment, lost. And yet, maybe they're exactly what we need again, something quick, simple, and quietly perfect. Because history doesn't always come on a silver platter. Sometimes, it comes toasted, buttered, and served on a paper napkin. Up next, a deviled dish with a bite and a story that will surprise you. Long before nachos and cheese balls ruled the snack table, 1912 gave us something sharp, savory, and completely forgotten: deviled crackers. At first glance, it's just a humble oyster cracker or soda biscuit. But once you spread it with a fiery mixture of grated cheese, mustard, and anchovy paste, and bake it gently inside a paper bag, you've got yourself a bite-sized powerhouse of flavor. Middle-class families love them for their simplicity. No need for rare ingredients. Just pantry staples: a bit of butter, a scrap of cheese, a pinch of dry mustard, and maybe a spoonful of anchovy essence, the kind that lingered in glass bottles at the back of every proper kitchen cupboard. Mix it together, smear it on crackers, bag them up, and let the oven do its quiet magic. These crackers were never meant to be the main event. They were the in-between nibbles, served at tea time, with sherry before dinner, or during lively parlor games when laughter filled the room and no one wanted to stop for a full meal. And yes, they had heat, just enough to raise eyebrows. Deviled didn't mean spicy like today's chilies, it meant daring. A little kick. A wink of rebellion in an otherwise proper evening. But like so many flavorful fragments of the past, deviled crackers slipped through the cracks. Processed snacks took over. Anchovy paste? Forgotten. Paper bag baking? Obsolete. And the art of dressing up a cracker faded into quiet memory. Yet imagine bringing them back not just for nostalgia, but for the joy of it. A tray of tiny golden rounds, crisp on the edges, bold in flavor, whispering tales from a world that knew how to stretch small things into something meaningful. Because sometimes the best dishes weren't fancy. They were just clever. And unforgettable. Stay tuned. Next, we head to the breakfast table for something smoky, old world, and nearly extinct. In 1912, breakfast wasn't always eggs and toast. For many middle-class American families, especially those with English or Scandinavian roots, the morning meal meant something smokier, heartier, and yes, a bit smellier. They called them bloaters, whole smoked herring, split, soaked, and gently baked, often in a paper bag to keep in the aroma and flavor. It may sound odd now, but back then, bloaters were a respected staple. Imported from England or smoked locally, they were cheap, nutritious, and packed with protein. Housewives would soak them overnight to reduce the salt, then slide them into a hot oven with a touch of butter, a splash of milk, and maybe a sprig of parsley. Served alongside boiled potatoes or thick slabs of bread, they made for a breakfast that stuck to your ribs. You could smell it before you saw it, the rich scent of wood smoke and sea salt curling through the kitchen. For children, it was the smell of morning. For fathers heading to work, it was fuel for the day. And for many middle-class homes, especially in coastal towns or cities with strong immigrant communities, bloaters were a weekly ritual often served on Sundays or market days. But as American tastes shifted, and refrigeration made fresh meats more accessible, smoked fish for breakfast began to vanish. The very word bloater slipped out of recipe books and out of memory. Today, it's nearly impossible to find anyone preparing bloaters at home. But in their time, they were more than food, they were culture. They were resilience. A bridge between old world tradition and new world adaptation. And maybe, just maybe, that smoky, flaky, buttery bite deserves one more morning in the spotlight. Because forgotten food isn't always strange. Sometimes, it's just waiting to be remembered. Up next, a molded fish dish that defied the odds and the shape of your dinner plate. Picture this, it's 1912, and dinner is being served in a modest, middle-class home. The table is set, the oil lamp is lit, and up comes something both strange and beautiful, codfish cones. Yes, cones. Perfectly molded towers made of flaked salt cod, mashed potatoes, and creamy white sauce brushed with buttered breadcrumbs and baked until golden. To us, it may sound like a culinary curiosity, but back then, it was a symbol of care and creativity. Salt cod was cheap, easy to store, and widely used in American kitchens. But rather than just frying it up, resourceful housewives turned it into art. With a tin mold or just a steady hand, they shaped it into cones, a style inspired by both French presentation and frugality. Cookbooks of the time recommended pairing codfish cones with a parsley cream or a simple brown sauce. Served alongside cooked carrots or stewed tomatoes, they made a plate feel refined even if the ingredients were humble. It wasn't just food, it was form and function. Children found them fun. Guests found them curious. And homemakers? They found pride in transforming scraps into something elegant. But as canned tuna and frozen fish took over the American kitchen, dishes like codfish cones quietly disappeared. The cone molds were sold off at estate sales. The recipes were skipped over in old cookbooks. And before long, no one remembered that fish ever came in shapes. Yet today, it's a dish worth revisiting not because it's trendy, but because it reminds us of a time when every meal was made with both thrift and thought. Codfish cones weren't just about taste, they were about effort. About making do and making it beautiful. And maybe, in this world of fast meals and forgotten techniques, it's time to give the cone its crown once more. Coming up next, a savory side dish wrapped in layers and layered in meaning.